The young woman with almond-shaped eyes, dressed in a simple black dress that contrasted with the golden gleam of the Manhattan penthouse, had just confessed something that would completely transform this cold January night. "I've never done this before. I'm pure." The words echoed between the glass walls that revealed the twinkling lights of Fifth Avenue, and James Harrison, a 42-year-old man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his professional life, felt for the first time in decades that he had completely lost control of the situation. The silence that settled was not what he had expected for this evening. Through the window, New York City stretched like an ocean of lights under an ink-black sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding at the top of this historic building. "Sometimes it's in the moments when we lose all control that we truly discover who we are," he thought, surprised by this unexpected reflection. James slowly approached the window, his reflection superimposed on the city lights. He observed his face, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes testifying to years of ruthless negotiations, the square jawline always tense, the salt and pepper hair impeccably groomed, and wondered how he had arrived at this point. The young woman, Emily Walker, remained motionless near the door, hands clutched on her cheap handbag. She was only 22, but her eyes carried the weight of a lifetime of struggles. "Why are you here, then?" he finally asked, his voice softer than he had intended. A shiver ran through Emily's body. This night would change their lives forever, but neither of them could yet imagine how much. 3 days earlier, Emily Walker had been vigorously scrubbing the floor of an office building on Wall Street. Her knees protested against the prolonged contact with the cold tiles, but she continued methodically, square by square. It was her first job of the day, beginning at 5 in the morning before the employees arrived. The phone in the pocket of her work smock vibrated. Her wet hand left watermarks on the cracked screen when she read the message from her mother. "The hospital called. They can't wait any longer for payment. They're talking about stopping the treatment." Emily closed her eyes, a wave of nausea overtaking her. Her mother, in a small village in Vermont, was fighting a rare degenerative disease, and the experimental medications weren't covered by health insurance. Her 3 younger siblings depended entirely on her, as their father was too proud to admit he could no longer provide for his family with his struggling small farm. "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey." The voice of Claudia, a woman in her 40s who cleaned the upper floor, roused Emily from her torpor. "It's my mother." "Are the medical bills?" Emily murmured, unable to finish her sentence. Claudia knelt beside her, checking that no one was listening. "I might have a solution for you. A quick way to earn a lot of money. Just one night." Emily was already shaking her head, guessing where this conversation was leading. "I don't do those kinds of things, Claudia. Sweetie, we all do things we never imagined when those we love need us." Claudia pulled an elegant business card from her pocket. "Call this number if you change your mind. They're looking for girls like you, young, pretty, with good manners. These men pay very well." That card stayed in Emily's pocket for 2 days, burning her conscience like a hot coal. Then came another call from her mother, this time in tears, announcing that the hospital had set an ultimatum. That's when Emily dialed the number. "You don't have to do this." James's voice resonated in the silent penthouse as he picked up the fallen envelope and placed it on the marble coffee table. The contrast between this gesture and Emily's words created a palpable tension in the air. Emily, trembling but determined, straightened her shoulders. "You don't understand. I need this money. My mother will die if—" She broke off, unable to continue. James observed this young woman, noting the details that his financial analyst's eye was accustomed to catching. The cheap but carefully ironed dress, the clean but unpainted nails, the brown hair simply tied back, without the costly artifices sported by women in his social circle. "Tell me," he said simply, indicating the Italian leather couch. Hesitantly, Emily sat on the edge of the seat, ready to flee at any moment. James walked to the open kitchen and returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I'm not what you think," Emily began, her hands wrapping around the cup to absorb its warmth. "I work as a cleaner in the morning, a waitress at a coffee shop in the afternoon, and at a clothing store in the evening. But my mother is sick, very sick, and my 3 siblings are still in school." Over the next hour, Emily's story unfolded like a fragile silk thread between them. James listened, occasionally asking precise questions that revealed his analytical mind. What specific treatment? Which hospital? What exact amounts? When Emily finished her story, the lights of New York had changed, shifting from commercial glares to the softer lights of inhabited apartments. James rose and walked to his study, opening a drawer from which he took out a checkbook. "I'll help you," he said, his voice devoid of any condescension. "Not for what you thought you had to do tonight, but because your story deserves a different ending." Emily stiffened. "I don't want your pity." "It's not pity. Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" James smiled slightly, his first genuine smile of the evening. "In something rare in my world, honesty." James's check had been cashed the following morning by Emily, but only after an entire night spent contemplating the peeling ceiling of her tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn. The money had been immediately transferred to the hospital in Vermont, accompanied by a letter explaining that future payments would follow regularly. What she hadn't anticipated was James's call 3 days later. "I'd like to invite you to dinner, Miss Walker." His voice on the phone was professional, almost distant. Emily almost declined, but an unexpected curiosity made her accept. They agreed to meet at a small restaurant near Central Park, discreet enough not to attract attention, but respectable enough to leave no doubt about the nature of their meeting. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. James, freed from the troubling context of their first meeting, revealed himself to be a cultured man, with a genuine passion for art history, a field that Emily had always admired from afar, never having had the means to visit museums or buy books on the subject. "Why did you invite me?" Emily finally asked as the waiter cleared their dessert plates. James took time to reflect, carefully folding his napkin before answering. "Because you're the first person in a long time who saw me as a man, not as a walking investment portfolio." Emily couldn't help but laugh. "I remind you that our meeting was precisely based on your portfolio. On the contrary, you came in for a transaction, but you chose honesty instead of playing a role. It's refreshing." That first dinner was followed by a second, then a third. Emily maintained her emotional distance, convinced that this man would eventually want something in return. But the weeks passed, and James asked for nothing more than her company and her honest opinions on everything, from art exhibitions to the complex business decisions he patiently explained to her. The first crack in their budding relationship appeared a month later, when Emily received a letter from the hospital. All past bills had been settled, and a fund had been created to cover all future treatments. She confronted James in his office on Park Avenue, making her way past his surprised secretary. "How dare you!" she exclaimed, throwing the letter onto his mahogany desk. James, in the middle of a video conference with investors in Tokyo, politely excused himself and disconnected the call. "I have the means to help, Emily. Why not accept it?" "Because I don't want to be your charity case." "I don't want to owe you more than I already do." James stood, coming around his desk to face her directly. "Is it so difficult to accept that someone might simply want to help you without expecting anything in return?" "Yes," Emily almost shouted, "because it doesn't exist. Everyone wants something." A heavy silence settled between them, filled with unspoken truths and old wounds. Finally, James spoke, his voice barely audible. "Maybe what I want is simply to prove you wrong." The pouring March rain transformed the streets of New York into shimmering rivers, reflecting the streetlights like fallen stars. James waited for Emily under the portico of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, 2 tickets for the temporary exhibition on Impressionism in his hand. She was late, a rarity that worried him. When she finally appeared, running through the rain with a cheap umbrella that had turned inside out under the force of the wind, her face bore traces of recent tears that the rain couldn't completely hide. "What's wrong?" he immediately asked, abandoning any pretense of formality. Emily shook her head, trying to smile. "Nothing important. Let's go see those Monets you've talked so much about." But James now knew Emily well enough to recognize when she was lying. He gently took her arm and led her to a nearby cafe, ignoring her protests. Once seated in front of 2 hot chocolates, Emily finally yielded. "I was fired from the coffee shop today. Apparently the owner's son saw me leaving a restaurant with you last week. He told his father that I was a—" She couldn't finish her sentence. James felt a cold anger rise within him, but he carefully controlled it. "I'm sorry that my presence in your life is causing you problems." Emily abruptly raised her head. "Don't apologize. It's their narrow-mindedness that's the problem, not you." It was the first time she had defended him like this, and this realization created a moment of silent connection between them. "There's something I've never told you, Emily," James began, staring at his chocolate as if it contained answers. "The reason I was alone that night, why I'm always alone." He then told her the story he hadn't shared with anyone for years, how, as a young man of 25, with a promising career ahead of him, he had fallen madly in love with a woman named Claire, how they had gotten engaged, planned a future together, how, a week before their wedding, he had discovered she had been having a relationship with his best friend for months, how during the confrontation she had simply shrugged and said, "You were a good career move, James, don't take it personally." Since then, I keep everyone at a distance. Relationships in my world are rarely based on authentic feelings. Money corrupts everything. Emily listened without interruption, her own pain momentarily forgotten in the face of this revelation of vulnerability. "We're both prisoners, aren't we?" she murmured. "You, of your wealth. Me, of my poverty." This conversation marked a turning point. For the first time, they truly saw each other, not as the rich benefactor and the young woman in need, but as two people carrying different but equally deep scars. The following day, Emily received a letter containing a job offer as an assistant at the Contemporary Art Gallery that James had been financially supporting for years. She almost tore it up, but stopped upon reading the attached note. "This isn't from me." "The director was at the cafe yesterday and overheard our conversation. She was impressed by your knowledge of Monet. You deserve this opportunity." "Smile, for heaven's sake. You look like you're going to a funeral," hissed Isabella Harrison, James's older sister, as they approached the entrance of the Lincoln Center. The annual Arts Foundation Gala attracted New York's elite, and tonight, for the first time, James had brought Emily as his official companion. Emily nervously adjusted the midnight blue dress that James had given her, her first concession to accepting an expensive gift from him. The silk glided over her skin like water, so different from the cheap fabrics she was used to. "I don't belong in this world, Isabella," she whispered to the elegant 50-year-old woman who, after weeks of fierce resistance to her existence, had finally agreed to help her prepare for this crucial evening. "No one truly belongs in this world, my dear. We're all playing a role. The secret is to make others believe we're not." James observed this interaction with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. The gradual acceptance of Emily by Isabella was unexpected, especially after the disastrous family meeting at the Hamptons estate 2 months earlier, where his mother had practically thrown Emily out of the property. The photographer's flashes popped as they entered, and Emily felt all eyes turned toward her. Who is she? Where does she come from? How did she catch the attention of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? The first hour was a torture of introductions and superficial conversations. Emily clung to James's arm like a lifeline, desperately trying to remember the names and titles of all those faces with fixed smiles. Then came the moment she dreaded. James was called away for an urgent discussion with a senator, leaving her alone near the bar. Almost immediately, 2 middle-aged women approached, their jewelry glittering as coldly as their eyes. "So, you're James's new distraction," one of them began, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. He gets bored quickly." Emily felt her heart race. For weeks, she had mentally prepared responses to such attacks, but now, faced with this barely veiled hostility, words failed her. "James isn't the type to commit," added the other woman, swirling her champagne in her crystal flute. "My niece knows that well. 3 months was his record so far. You're approaching the expiration date." Emily looked around, seeking an escape. It was then that a deep, authoritative voice sounded behind her. "Ladies, I see you're getting acquainted with Emily. I hope you're telling her about the excellent work she's doing at the Light Gallery. Her knowledge of Impressionist art is truly remarkable." Robert Harrison, James's father, stood there, imposing in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. At 75, he remained a force in the American business world, and his unexpected appearance at this gala, he who detested social events, created a shockwave. The 2 women retreated quickly, leaving Emily alone with this man whom she had met only once briefly, and who had barely looked at her. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," she said softly. "Robert," he corrected, "and don't thank me. These hyenas understand only social hierarchy. They're jealous because you have something they never had and never will." "Money?" asked Emily, confused. Robert laughed, A surprisingly warm sound coming from this man with the icy reputation. No, my dear. My son's genuine interest. I've been watching him since you entered his life. He's changed. For the first time since that business with Claire, he truly smiles. This simple validation from an unexpected source gave Emily the strength to navigate the rest of the evening with her head held high. But the real test came later, when a journalist from a well-known tabloid approached her as she left the restroom. "Miss Walker, is it true that you met James Harrison through an escort service?" The question, deliberately asked loudly so others could hear, froze Emily in place. Around her, conversations stopped, and she felt dozens of gazes turn toward her, eager for her reaction. In this moment of truth, Emily did what no one expected. She smiled, approached the journalist and said in a clear, calm voice, "Sir, if you're truly interested in a story, why not write about the microcredit fund for women entrepreneurs that the Harrison Foundation has just launched in Vermont? That's a subject that would deserve your attention far more than malicious gossip." Then she walked away, head held high, under Isabella's admiring gaze and Robert's proud smile. That night, she earned not only the respect of the Harrison family, but also her own. You must choose, James. This relationship, or your position in the family business. The voice of Elizabeth Harrison, matriarchally seated in the large Queen Anne chair that dominated her private sitting room in the Hamptons estate, left no room for negotiation. At 78, Elizabeth Harrison maintained firm control over the financial empire she and her husband had built, and which she continued to direct with an iron hand since her widowhood. James stood before her, like a schoolboy summoned to the principal's office, despite his 42 years and considerable personal fortune. "Mother, with all due respect, my personal life is not subject to your approval." Elizabeth delicately set down her teacup, the porcelain tinkling in the heavy silence. "You're wrong, my son. In our position, personal and professional lives are inseparable. This girl is not from our world. The rumors about how she entered your life persist. Our reputation—" "I don't care about reputation," James interrupted, momentarily losing his legendary calm. "For once in my life, I've found someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I own." Elizabeth raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "And you really think she would be interested in you if you were a simple office worker? Don't be naive, James. Money always attracts these kinds of people." This comment struck James to the heart, awakening his deepest doubts. Did Emily truly have feelings for him? Or was it the financial security he represented that attracted her? Despite 5 months of relationship, this question still haunted him in his moments of vulnerability. His mother, sensing his uncertainty, delivered the final blow. "Think, James, if you choose to continue this relationship, the family shares you hold in the company will be bought back. You'll lose your seat on the board. Is she really worth such a sacrifice?" James left the estate without answering, driving his car at dangerous speed on the winding roads of Long Island. His phone rang several times, Emily concerned about his unusual silence, but he didn't answer. He spent the night in a small anonymous hotel, confronted with the most difficult choice of his life. By morning, his decision was made. Emily waited in their apartment in Greenwich Village, having spent a sleepless night imagining 1,000 catastrophic scenarios. When James finally entered, his face was unreadable. "Your mother wants you to leave me, doesn't she?" she asked directly. James nodded slowly. "She gave me an ultimatum. You or the family business." Emily felt her heart break. Despite all their shared moments, despite the promises whispered in the intimacy of their bedroom, she knew what that empire represented for him. Generations of work, a legacy, his very identity. "I understand," she said softly, already mentally packing her belongings. "I won't hold it against you. Your family—" "I've made my choice," James interrupted. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I've chosen to create my own path. I resigned from my position on the board this morning." Emily looked at him with horror. "No, you can't sacrifice all that for me." "I'm not sacrificing anything of real value," he replied, his face suddenly more serene than she had ever seen it. "For years I've built fortunes for others, negotiated mergers, restructured companies. I've accumulated money and power, but for what? To be alone in a golden penthouse?" He rose and walked to the window, contemplating the view of the Hudson River. "I have enough personal money to live comfortably 100 lifetimes. I have connections throughout America. I can create my own consulting firm, work on my own terms. Emily approached him, gently touching his arm. But your mother, your siblings, they'll come around when they see I'm serious. Isabella is already on our side, and Robert too, in his way. He turned to her. The real question is, are you ready for this journey? It won't be easy. My mother is influential. She can make life difficult for us for a while. Emily felt tears rise. For months she had fought against her growing feelings, convinced their relationship was temporary, that a man like James couldn't really love her, a simple country girl with no formal education or social connections. I love you, she said simply, uttering those words for the first time. I love you enough to face all this by your side. That evening they wrote together a press release announcing James's resignation from the board of Harrison Financial and the creation of his new company, Light Consulting. The name was a tribute to the art gallery where Emily still worked, and to the change she had brought into his life. The break was complete. The path had changed direction. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section, with a headline that had the effect of a bomb in the American business world. Scandal in the Harrison house, heir dethroned for affair with escort. James, who was having his coffee while preparing a presentation for a potential new client, dropped his cup, which shattered on the hardwood floor of their new apartment, more modest than his former penthouse, but still elegant and located in Greenwich Village. From now on they were navigating uncharted waters together. Emily, he called, his voice tense with urgency. But she had already seen. Standing in the doorway, her face was deathly pale as she held her phone, where dozens of notifications of messages and missed calls were flashing. They did it, she whispered. Your mother finally used her nuclear option. The article, signed by a journalist known for his close ties to the Harrison family, recounted in distorted detail their first meeting, claiming that Emily was a professional companion hired by James, who would later fall under her manipulative charm. Sources close to the family, quoted anonymously, spoke of a calculated campaign on Emily's part to seduce the heir and secure a comfortable position. The article even insinuated that the creation of Light Consulting was a way to divert funds from the family business. We need to call our lawyer immediately, James declared, already switching to crisis management mode. But Emily remained motionless, as if petrified. My siblings will read this, my mother and the whole village. Her voice broke. During the 8 months of their relationship, she had worked hard to build her own professional identity at the gallery, had enrolled in evening art history courses, had even begun writing exhibition reviews for a small cultural magazine. Everything she had built now seemed reduced to ashes by these words printed in black and white. The following days were a media nightmare. Other newspapers picked up the story, adding their own embellishments. Paparazzi camped outside their building. Emily's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Curious former colleagues, friends looking for gossip, her distressed family. The gallery where she worked asked her to take a temporary leave until the situation calms down. Her university courses became unbearable, the whispers and stares following her in the corridors. James, accustomed to media storms, tried to protect her as best he could. But for Emily, this public exposure was an unprecedented torture. The crisis reached its peak when Emily received a call from her father, his voice trembling with anger and shame. Is it true? He asked simply. Tell me it's not true, Emily. Dad, it's not like they describe it. Yes, I met James in unusual circumstances, but I didn't. She couldn't find the words to explain that fateful night without confirming her father's worst fears. The silence at the other end of the line was more devastating than any accusation. Finally, her father spoke, his voice unrecognizable. Don't come back to the village for now. Your mother is upset enough as it is. The click that followed resonated in Emily's soul like a gunshot. That night, James found her sitting in the dark on the balcony of their apartment, staring at the New York skyline without seeing it. I've lost my family, she said without turning around. I've lost my job. I've lost my dignity. And for what? James knelt before her, seeking her gaze in the darkness. For us, for a chance to live authentically. Emily shook her head. Maybe your mother was right. Maybe we shouldn't be together. Our worlds are too different. Don't say that, James pleaded, an unusual panic in his voice. We can overcome this. How? Emily asked, her voice flat, empty of emotion. "How do you rebuild a destroyed reputation? How do you regain your family's trust? How—" She broke off, exhausted by grief and humiliation. James remained silent for a long time, understanding that empty promises would not suffice. Finally, he said softly, "One step at a time. That's all we can do. One step at a time." That night, they slept separately for the first time in months. Emily on the couch, James in their bedroom, both staring at the ceiling, wondering if their love could survive the trial by media fire. Rain beat against the windows of the New York apartment, creating a melancholy symphony that perfectly matched the mood of its occupants. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating article, and although the paparazzi had grown tired, the damage persisted like a poorly healed wound. Emily wandered through the apartment like a ghost, spending hours staring at her computer screen where cruel comments appeared under online articles. James had tried to dissuade her from reading them, but she seemed unable to stop, inflicting this pain on herself as a form of self-punishment. "I have an important meeting today," James announced that morning, adjusting his tie in front of the hallway mirror. "A major potential client for Light Consulting. It could be the contract that really puts us back on track." Emily nodded distractedly, her gaze lost in the void. In recent days, communication between them had been reduced to these practical exchanges, the complicity and intimacy of before seeming to have evaporated under the media pressure. "Emily," James insisted, approaching her, "are you listening to me?" "Yes, of course. Good luck with your meeting." Her tone was flat, detached. James sighed, a mixture of frustration and concern creasing his forehead. "This can't continue," he said softly. "You need to get out of this apartment, take back control of your life." Emily finally looked at him directly, and James was struck by the pain that inhabited her eyes. "What life, James? I can't go back to the gallery, the looks, the whispers, and my courses. The same thing. Every time I enter a room, conversations stop. I've become a spectacle." James knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll start over somewhere else. Boston, Chicago, even San Francisco if you want. We can rebuild everything." "You mean run away?" Her voice was bitter. "Abandon everything we've fought for." "Not run away, reinvent ourselves." Emily withdrew her hands. "That's easy for you. You already have an established identity, recognized skills. I'm just the girl who seduced James Harrison. That's all I'll ever be to the world." This conversation, they'd had it in different forms for days, going in circles without finding a way out. James finally left for his meeting, leaving Emily alone with her tormented thoughts. That day she did something she hadn't dared to do since the article. She called her mother. "Emily," Mrs. Walker answered after several rings, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "How are you, my daughter?" This simple question, asked with a mother's unconditional love, broke something in Emily. The tears she had held back for weeks suddenly burst forth, and she sobbed into the phone, unable to speak. "Oh, my little one," her mother murmured. I know. "Have you read the articles?" Emily finally managed to ask between sobs. "Yes, and your father too. And now you hate me." Her mother's gentle laugh surprised her. "Hate you? Emily, we're worried, confused, and your father is certainly upset by the way you were publicly exposed. But hate you? Never." These simple words were like a lifeline thrown to a castaway. For the first time since the media storm, Emily felt she wasn't completely alone. "James, is he good to you?" her mother asked, with the direct frankness that characterized her. Emily pondered this seemingly simple question. "He loves me," she finally answered. "I know that, but sometimes I wonder if love is enough in the face of so many obstacles." "Love is never enough on its own, my daughter. It also takes courage, perseverance, and sometimes the willingness to forgive, not only others but also yourself." This conversation was the first ray of light in the darkness that enveloped Emily. But that evening, when James returned, his face somber and defeated, she immediately knew something had gone wrong. "They cancelled the contract," he announced, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, a habit he had recently resumed after years of abstinence. "Apparently they don't want to associate their brand with someone making tabloid headlines." The despair in his voice was palpable. For the first time, Emily clearly saw how much this situation was also affecting James. While she had been wallowing in self-pity, he had been silently struggling to keep his new company afloat in the face of prejudice and rumors. "I'm sorry," she whispered, suddenly feeling selfish for having been so absorbed in her own pain. James shook his head. "It's not your fault. It's my mother pulling strings behind the scenes, I'm certain of it. She's always known how to exert discreet but effective pressure." That night, lying side by side in their bed, but separated by an emotional abyss, Emily made a decision. If their relationship was to survive, something had to change. And perhaps that change needed to start with her. "James," she whispered in the darkness, "I think I need to leave for a while." She felt his body stiffen beside her. "Leave? Not leave you," she quickly clarified. "But step back. Go back to the village. Make peace with my family, with myself. I can't continue to be this burden for you, this broken woman who haunts your apartment." James turned toward her, seeking her face in the dimness. "You've never been a burden, Emily. Never. But I'm not myself anymore either. And I need to find who I am before I can fully be with you." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts, fears and uncertainties. Finally James spoke, his voice barely audible. "How long?" "I don't know. As long as it takes." "And if you don't come back?" The vulnerability in this question broke Emily's heart. For the first time in weeks, she nestled against him, resting her head on his chest. "If our love is real, I'll come back. And if I don't come back, then maybe your mother was right all along." The following morning, Emily was packing her suitcase, preparing for her temporary return to Vermont. A painful but necessary decision, the first step toward possible healing, or toward the definitive end of their love story. The village of Maple Creek hadn't changed, fixed in a timeless beauty that even winter couldn't dim. The century-old maple trees, the weathered clapboard facades, the church steeple that always rang with a slight delay. Everything was exactly as Emily remembered. Yet she felt like a stranger, walking down the paved streets, with the impression of being constantly observed, judged. It wasn't just an impression. Curious glances did follow her, conversations did stop as she passed, only to resume in whispers as soon as she moved away. The family home, an old farmhouse renovated over generations, stood on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by a modest field of wildflowers that wouldn't bloom for several months yet. Emily stopped in front of the wrought-iron gate, suitcase in hand, hesitant. Her father spotted her from the barn where he was repairing an old tool. He froze for a moment, then wiped his hands on his work pants and slowly approached. Emily held her breath, uncertain of the welcome that awaited her. "Did you have a good trip?" he asked simply, taking her suitcase without looking her directly in the eyes. "Yes, thank you, Dad." That was all. No embrace, no reproaches either. Just this polite distance that hurt more than any confrontation. Inside, her mother was more demonstrative, enveloping her in a hug that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. Her younger siblings, Matt, 16, Lily, 14, and little Ethan, 10, reacted with a mixture of curiosity and shyness, as if facing a stranger. "How long are you staying?" Lily asked during dinner, breaking the awkward silence that reigned around the rustic table. Emily looked at her plate of meatloaf, her favorite dish that her mother had specially prepared for her return. "I don't know yet. A few weeks, maybe longer." "And your rich boyfriend," Lily persisted with the brutal frankness of adolescence. "Won't he miss you?" "Lily," her mother intervened, casting a warning look at her daughter. "It's okay, Mum," Emily said softly. "James and we need space to think." Her father noisily set down his fork. "Think about what? About how he ruined your reputation?" "Dad, that's not fair. James didn't do anything wrong." "Nothing wrong." Her father's voice trembled slightly. "He exposed you to public ridicule. God, Emily, we had journalists here. They dug through our lives, asked questions about your childhood, insinuated things." He broke off, unable to continue, the pain and humiliation evident in his eyes. Emily then fully understood the extent of the collateral damage from her relationship with James. It wasn't just her life that had been turned upside down, but also that of everyone she loved. The following days were an exercise in humility and patience. Emily resumed her place in the family routine, helping with household chores, accompanying her father in the fields, assisting her mother in meal preparation. Slowly, The layers of tension began to dissipate, replaced by the familiar comfort of family bonds. A week after her arrival, while helping Ethan with his math homework, her phone vibrated with a message from James. "I miss you. The house is empty without you. How are you?" Emily stared at the screen for a long time before simply replying, "I'm better. I need more time." This brief communication triggered a painful realization. Despite the distance she had put between them, her heart remained irrevocably tied to this man. But was it true love or simply the emotional dependency that had developed through their shared trials? This question tormented her as she walked alone the next day in the surrounding hills, seeking clarity in the austere beauty of the winter landscape. At the top of a small ridge, she sat on a rock, contemplating the village below, and, in the distance, the foothills of the Green Mountains. "I thought I might find you here." The voice made her start. Megan, her childhood friend, was climbing toward her, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. They had once been inseparable, but their paths had diverged when Emily left for New York. Since then, their interactions had been limited to occasional messages and birthday cards. "Megan, what are you doing here? Your mother told me you were back." She sat beside Emily, pulling a thermos from her bag. "Peppermint tea, still your favorite, right?" This simple gesture of familiarity moved Emily more than she would have thought possible. They shared the tea in silence, watching the winter sun play on the shingled roofs. "So," Megan finally said, "is it true what they're saying? You fell in love with a billionaire?" Emily couldn't help but laugh, her first genuine laugh in a long time. "He's not a billionaire, just very rich, and yes, I love him, or at least I think I do." "You think?" Megan looked at her with curiosity, without judgment. "How can you not be sure if you love someone?" Emily sighed, searching for words to express the complexity of her feelings. "When two people from such different worlds meet, Megan, it's hard to know what's real and what's a reaction to extraordinary circumstances. James saved me from a desperate situation. Do I love him for himself or for what he represents?" "For the security he offers me." Megan reflected a moment, then gently asked, "And him? Why does he love you?" This simple question struck Emily like a revelation. Why did James love her? Was it for her youth, her relative beauty? Because she represented a form of authenticity in his world of appearances. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never really asked him." "Maybe you should." This conversation marked a turning point in Emily's reflection. In the days that followed, she began keeping a journal, honestly exploring her feelings, her fears, her hopes. She wrote letters to James that she didn't send, pouring onto paper all the questions she had never dared ask him directly. One morning, 3 weeks after her arrival, she was having coffee in the kitchen when her father entered, already dressed for work in the fields despite the early hour. "You're up early," he noted, pouring himself a cup. "Couldn't sleep." He sat across from her, his rough hands wrapping around his cup as if to absorb its warmth. "Emily, I need to tell you something. When you left for New York, I was terrified, not just for the usual reasons a father has when his daughter leaves the nest. I was afraid the city would change you, corrupt you." He paused, visibly searching for words. "When those articles came out, I thought my worst fears had been realized. I was angry. With you, with that man, with myself for letting you go, but these past weeks, watching you—" His voice broke slightly. "You're still my Emily. Stronger perhaps, certainly wiser, but still that girl with a pure heart and an iron will. And if that man, James, saw and loved these qualities in you, then perhaps I was wrong about him." This reconciliation with her father was like the missing piece of a complex puzzle. Emily finally understood that she could never completely erase her past or the circumstances of her meeting with James, but that these events didn't define her, no more than they defined their love. That evening, she called James for the first time since her departure. "I need to know," she said without preamble when he answered. "Why do you love me, James? Not how, not since when." "Why?" The silence at the other end of the line was so long that for a moment she thought the connection had been cut. Then, his voice resonated, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I love you because you saw me when I was invisible. In a world where everyone looked at my fortune, you looked at my flaws. You challenged me when others blindly approved. You made me better, more human." A tear slid down Emily's cheek. "Is that enough, in the face of everything we've been through?" In the face of everything that still awaits us? She asked softly. I don't know, he answered honestly. But I know I want to try, not because you're perfect, not because our story is, but because life without you is incomplete. This conversation, as brief as it was, crystallized something in Emily. The broken mirror of her doubts was beginning to reassemble, not into a smooth and flawless surface, but into a richer and more complex mosaic. Imperfect, but all the more precious for it. Dawn was rising over the green mountains, tinting the sky pink and gold. Emily, seated on her window ledge, observed this daily spectacle with new eyes. 6 weeks had passed since her arrival in the village, 6 weeks of healing and rediscovery. Her phone gently vibrated beside her. A message from James. Good morning, my love. I'm taking the plane today. May I see you? Emily smiled. Their phone conversations had become regular, evolving from simple exchanges of news to deep discussions that often continued late into the night. James had told her about his progress with light consulting, slow but steady, despite the continued resistance from some circles influenced by his mother. Emily had confided her reflections, her residual doubts, but also the inner peace she was beginning to find. Yes, meet me at the covered bridge at noon. She prepared with care but simplicity, jeans, a cashmere sweater, a gift from James that she now allowed herself to wear without guilt, and a light jacket. Her hair, which she had let grow, fell freely onto her shoulders. The covered bridge was an emblematic place in the village, an ancient wooden arch that spanned a small stream at the edge of a maple grove. It was a place loaded with memories for Emily. She had played there as a child, received her first kiss at 15, cried over her first heartbreaks. James was already waiting, elegant even in casual attire, leaning against the wooden railing. Emily paused a moment to observe him before he noticed her. He seemed different, more relaxed perhaps, less rigid in his posture. He had grown a light beard that accentuated his jawline and strangely softened his features. When he turned his head and saw her, his face lit up with a pure joy that melted Emily's last reservations. She approached him, and without a word they found themselves in each other's arms. I missed you, he murmured against her hair. I missed you too. They walked hand in hand along the stream, catching up in person on what their phone conversations couldn't fully communicate. James told her how he had finally secured a major contract with a German tech company, not despite the scandal, but almost because of it. The CEO had been impressed by his resilience and his refusal to conform to family pressures. And you? He finally asked. What have you decided for your future? For our future? Emily stopped, taking both his hands in hers and looking directly into his eyes. I want to be with you, James, I truly do, but not like before. He frowned slightly, concerned. What do you mean? I no longer want to be simply James Harrison's companion. I need to have my own identity, my own career. James nodded, understanding. Of course, the gallery would surely be happy to take you back now that the media storm has calmed down. No, Emily said firmly. I don't want to return to a job I obtained because of you, however rewarding that experience was. She took a deep breath. During these weeks here, I've thought a lot about what I really want to do. Remember that microcredit fund we talked about to help women entrepreneurs in rural areas? James nodded, remembering that conversation that now seemed to belong to another life. I want to actually create it. Not as a charitable project, but as a real social enterprise. I've done research, spoken with women from around here who have brilliant ideas but no access to capital. There's a real need, James. Her eyes shone with a passion and determination that James hadn't seen in a long time. But I have no training in finance, in management, Emily continued. You can learn, James gently interrupted. You're one of the smartest people I know. And I could help you, not by doing things for you, but by guiding you, introducing you to the right people. Would you agree to that, even if it means I'll spend time here, in the countryside? James smiled, caressing her cheek. Emily, I can work from anywhere. Light consulting doesn't have to be based in New York. In fact, he hesitated a moment, then continued. I visited a property yesterday before coming here. An old estate to restore, halfway between Burlington and Montpelier. Close enough for you to easily visit your family, but far enough to give us our space. Emily looked at him, astonished. You're seriously considering leaving New York? I'm seriously considering it, yes. These last few months have made me realize that I never really loved that city. I settled there because it was what was expected of me, where business was done. But now I can create my own rules." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Of course, if you prefer to stay in New York, or if you want your own space—" Emily placed a finger on his lips, interrupting him. "Show me this estate." They spent the afternoon exploring the property. A magnificent structure from the 18th century, surrounded by maples and pines, with a breathtaking view of the valley. It required significant renovation work, but its potential was evident. Emily stopped on the stone terrace, already imagining sunny breakfasts, dinners under the stars, a bright workspace where she could develop her project. "What do you think?" James asked, carefully observing her reactions. "I think it's perfect. Not as a refuge where we'd hide from the world, but as a new beginning, a place where we could build something together, each in our own way." That evening, they dined with Emily's family. The atmosphere was initially tense, especially on her father's side, but James's evident sincerity and Emily's radiant happiness gradually dissipated the reservations. When James explained his intention to buy a property in the region and settle there, Emily's father seemed particularly touched by this gesture. "You would leave New York for my daughter?" he asked, incredulous. "I'm not abandoning anything of real value," James simply replied. "I gain much more than I lose." Later, as they walked under the stars toward the small inn where James had booked a room, Emily took his hand. "I realized something today," she said softly. "All these weeks, I was trying to find out if our love was strong enough to survive the outside world. But the real question was, are we strong enough to create our own world? On our own terms?" James stopped, drawing her to him. "And what's the answer?" Emily smiled, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I believe we've just begun to write it." Spring had burst upon Vermont like a kept promise, transforming the hills into tapestries of wildflowers and filling the air with intoxicating scents. The estate, which James had purchased and renamed The Light, had become the center of frenzied activity. Local craftsmen were busy bringing the old house back to life, preserving its historic character while adapting it to modern needs. Emily personally supervised the work, revealing an unsuspected talent for architecture and interior design. That morning, she stood in what would soon become her office, a bright space overlooking centuries-old maple trees. The exposed beams of the ceiling had been carefully restored, and the stone walls, freed from the old plaster, revealed a rustic beauty that harmoniously contrasted with the contemporary large windows. "Miss Walker?" Emily turned to see Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her 50s with a face weathered by the Vermont sun, standing timidly at the entrance to the room. "Please come in," Emily invited her with a warm smile. Mrs. Thompson was the first potential candidate for the microcredit fund that Emily had officially launched a month earlier. Her project, a cooperative bakery that would allow women from the neighboring village to create their own products using local ingredients, was exactly the type of initiative that Emily wished to support. They sat on folding chairs, the definitive furniture not having arrived yet, and discussed for more than an hour the business plan that Emily had helped Mrs. Thompson develop. "I would never have imagined doing this," the older woman confided, looking with wonder at the financial projections on Emily's tablet. "At my age, starting a business, my husband thinks I'm crazy." "Age has nothing to do with dreams," Emily replied with conviction, "and sometimes the best ideas come from decades of experience." After Mrs. Thompson's departure, Emily remained thoughtful, contemplating the journey traveled since that fateful night in New York. In 6 months, her life had been completely transformed, not simply by her relationship with James, but by the courageous choices they had made together and separately. The fund, which she had named Future Seeds, was taking shape rapidly. James had provided the initial capital, but at her own insistence in the form of a loan that Emily would gradually repay as the social enterprise generated revenue. She wanted this project to be truly hers, built on her own merit rather than on her companion's fortune. James, for his part, had accomplished the impossible, transforming Light Consulting into a respected company, despite his mother's continued efforts to marginalize him in the business world. His new approach, favoring clients whose values aligned with his and refusing purely lucrative but ethically dubious contracts, had attracted a loyal and prestigious clientele. Even more surprising, Isabella, his older sister, had finally broken with the official family position and reconciled with James. She occasionally came to the light, bringing her expertise in interior decoration and slowly developing a friendly relationship with Emily. "What are you thinking about with that smile?" James's voice drew her from her reflections. He stood at the entrance, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "About us. About everything we've accomplished in such a short time." He handed her a cup and sat beside her, contemplating the magnificent view from the window. "Did Mrs. Thompson leave confident?" "Very. I'll approve her initial loan next week." James smiled, proud. "You know, when you first told me about this project, I was convinced of its potential, but I didn't expect it to take shape so quickly." "Neither did I," Emily admitted. "But there's such a need. These women have brilliant ideas, James, incredible skills. All they're missing is someone who believes in them and a small financial boost." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Exactly what you gave me." James took her free hand, squeezing it gently. "With one crucial difference, you didn't need me to succeed. You already had everything inside you." This recognition of her inner strength, of her potential independent of their relationship, was perhaps the most beautiful gift James had ever given her. James's phone vibrated in his pocket. He consulted it with an unreadable expression. "Who is it?" Emily asked, noticing his change in attitude. "My mother." Emily instinctively stiffened. Elizabeth Harrison remained the only persistent shadow on their happiness. Despite the gradual reconciliation with the rest of the family, the matriarch maintained her inflexible opposition to their relationship. "What does she want?" "To see me. Alone." James hesitated. "She's in Boston for the week." Emily took a deep breath. "You should go." "I'm not sure." "James." She set down her cup and took his face in her hands. "She's your mother. Despite everything she's done, she remains your mother. And perhaps it's time." James looked at her with tenderness mixed with admiration. "How can you be so magnanimous toward her after everything she's done?" Emily smiled sadly. "Because I know what it's like to be separated from your family, and I wouldn't want you to live with that regret, even if it's her choice and not yours." 2 days later, James went alone to Boston to meet his mother in the suite she occupied at the prestigious Four Seasons Hotel. Emily remained at the light, trying to focus on her work but unable to ignore the anxiety gnawing at her. When James returned late in the afternoon, his expression was unreadable. "How did it go?" Emily asked, welcoming him on the newly restored terrace. James sighed, sitting heavily in one of the wicker armchairs. "She's aging," he said simply. "I hadn't really noticed before. She seems more fragile." Emily sat across from him, patiently waiting for him to continue. "She didn't apologize. My mother never apologizes. But she told me she was disappointed that I hadn't come home for Christmas." He gave a small laugh without joy, as if the last few months hadn't existed. "What did you tell her?" "That my home is here now. With you." Emily felt her heart tighten at these words. "She proposed a compromise," James continued. "If we agree to attend the annual Family Foundation Gala next month, she'll make an effort to get to know you." Her words, not mine. "A gala?" Emily felt a wave of anxiety overwhelm her at the memory of her last experience at this type of social event. "James, the last time, it will be different," he firmly assured her. "This time we're going as an established couple, not as a curiosity. And if my mother keeps her word and publicly supports us, it will completely change the dynamic." Emily reflected a moment, weighing the pros and cons of this proposal. "All right," she finally said, "but on one condition." "Which one?" "That we invite your mother here to the light before the gala. If she truly wants to make an effort to get to know me, it won't be in her territory, surrounded by her world, but here, in ours." James looked at her with surprise, then with a growing smile. "That's brilliant, actually, and incredibly brave." "It's not courage," Emily gently corrected. "It's conviction. If we truly want to build something lasting, we must do it on our own terms." That night, as they dined under the stars, the scent of newly planted jasmine floating in the mild air, James raised his glass of local wine. "To our foundations," he said simply. "Not those of the estate, but those of our life together." Emily raised her glass, the crystal softly tinkling in the peaceful silence of their Vermont sanctuary. "To our foundations." and to everything we'll build upon them. The estate, the light, had never seemed so immaculate. Every surface gleamed, every flower was perfectly arranged, every detail meticulously checked. Emily, dressed in a simple but elegant sky-blue linen dress, paced in the main living room, nervously readjusting a cushion that was already perfectly positioned. "She'll be here in 10 minutes, James announced, hanging up his phone. "The driver has just left the airport." Emily felt her stomach knot. Elizabeth Harrison's visit represented much more than a simple family meeting. It was a moment of truth, a confrontation between two women separated by everything except their love for the same man. "What if she still hates me?" Emily whispered, finally expressing the fear that had been gnawing at her for days. James approached her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Then it will be her problem, not ours. We've built our life, Emily. We don't need her approval." "I know, but I still want it for you." The crunching of tires on the gravel driveway announced the limousine's arrival. Emily took a deep breath, straightened up, and followed James to the front door. Elizabeth Harrison descended from the car with the calculated elegance of a woman accustomed to being observed. At 78, she remained imposing. Dressed in an impeccable ivory Chanel suit, her white hair styled in a perfect chignon. Her gaze swept over the restored estate with an indecipherable expression before settling on Emily. "Mother," James greeted, stepping forward to welcome her. "Welcome to the light." "James." She accepted his formal kiss on the cheek before turning to Emily. "Miss Walker." "Mrs. Harrison." Emily stepped forward, extending her hand with an assurance she was far from feeling. "Thank you for accepting our invitation." Elizabeth briefly took her hand, her eyes scrutinizing Emily, as if seeking to penetrate all her secrets. "Your home is quaint," she finally said, using a tone that made it impossible to determine whether it was a compliment or a criticism. The first hours were a cautious social dance, a ballet of superficial politeness and carefully neutral conversation. Emily guided Elizabeth through the property, explaining the restoration choices and the history of the estate. James deliberately remained in the background, allowing the two women to interact directly. Lunch, served on the shaded terrace overlooking the valley, presented a menu prepared by Emily herself: a revisited Waldorf salad, a risotto with local truffles, and a maple syrup pie whose recipe came from her grandmother. She had chosen to cook personally rather than hiring a chef, a choice that didn't escape Elizabeth. "You cook remarkably well," the matriarch commented after tasting the risotto, "a skill few young women cultivate nowadays." "My mother taught me at a young age," Emily replied. "In our family, cooking was both a necessity and a form of expression." Elizabeth took a sip of local white wine that she seemed to appreciate despite herself. "And now you run a microcredit fund, I hear. A rather radical career change." "Not really," James intervened. "Emily has always had a natural talent for understanding others' needs and finding practical solutions. Her fund has already financed 7 projects, all promising." "Is that so?" Elizabeth turned to Emily with an interest that seemed for the first time authentic. Emily seized this opening to speak passionately about future seeds, its goals, the women it helped, and the results already visible in the surrounding communities. As she spoke, something subtly changed in Elizabeth's attitude. Her expression remained impassive, but her gaze imperceptibly softened. After dessert, James excused himself to take a professional call, intentionally leaving the two women alone. A tense silence settled on the terrace, broken only by the singing of birds and the distant murmur of the fountain in the garden. "Why did you really invite me here?" Elizabeth finally asked, going straight to the point. "We both know you don't need my approval." Emily looked directly at James's mother, deciding that honesty was the only possible approach, "because James needs you in his life, and because I refuse to believe we're destined to be enemies, simply because of the circumstances of our meeting." Elizabeth arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "The circumstances of your meeting, as you delicately call them, are not exactly conducive to trust." "No, they're not," Emily admitted, "and I understand your mistrust, Mrs. Harrison. In your place, I would probably have reacted the same way." This acknowledgement seemed to surprise Elizabeth. "Really?" "Yes. You're protecting your son and your family's legacy. It's natural, but I'm not a threat to that legacy. I simply want to be part of James's future, as he is part of mine." Elizabeth studied Emily for a long moment, her aristocratic face impassive. "Do you know what destroyed James's first marriage?" Emily stiffened, surprised by this change of subject. "He told me about Claire, yes." "Not the marriage, the engagement," Elizabeth corrected. "They never reached the altar. Claire Bennett was precisely the type of woman I wanted for my son. Educated, from a good family, elegant, but she didn't love him. She loved what he represented." Elizabeth delicately placed her napkin on the table. "I saw the signs before James did. I tried to warn him, but he was so convinced he had found true love. When the truth came out, it broke him in a way I never thought possible. My brilliant son, my favorite heir, reduced to a shadow of himself." Emily listened, amazed by this unexpected confession. "Since then, I've sworn that no one would ever hurt him again, especially not a young woman coming from nowhere, met in dubious circumstances who seemed too perfect to be true." "I'm not perfect," Emily said softly. "Far from it. And neither is our relationship. We've been through terrible moments, doubts, fears. But we've gone through them together." "Yes, that's what I observe," Elizabeth murmured, almost reluctantly. "James has changed. Not just since he met you, but especially since he chose to choose you despite everything. He has grown." She straightened, resuming her perfect posture. "I won't publicly approve of you at the gala, Miss Walker." Emily felt her heart sink. "I understand. Let me finish. I won't publicly approve of you, because that would be admitting I was wrong. And Elizabeth Harrison never admits she's wrong." A slight ironic smile briefly appeared on her lips. "But I will accept you as my son's companion. I will treat you with the respect due to the woman he has chosen. And with time, we'll see." It wasn't a declaration of affection, nor a true reconciliation, but it was a beginning, an opening in the wall that had separated James from his family. When James returned to the terrace, he found the two women calmly discussing the upcoming gala program, a sight he would never have thought possible a few hours earlier. Later that evening, after Elizabeth's departure, James and Emily walked hand in hand among the maple trees that bordered the property, the sky ablaze in a spectacular Vermont sunset. "My mother never does things halfway," James said, still amazed by his mother's change in attitude. "When she decides to accept something, she does it completely." "She hasn't accepted me completely," Emily corrected, "but she's opened the door, and for now, that's enough." James stopped, drawing Emily into his arms. "You're extraordinary, you know that. Confronting my mother on her own ground is something even my siblings avoid." Emily smiled, nestling against him as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a mutual recognition. Two women who loved the same man, each in her own way. James kissed her forehead, then murmured against her hair, "I love you, Emily Walker, more than I can ever express in words." "You don't need words," she replied softly. "You prove it every day with your actions." They remained like that, embraced under the starry sky, two people who had weathered storms and prejudice to create something precious and authentic, a love defined neither by money nor by the circumstances of their meeting, but by the courageous choices they had made together. The gala was approaching, the ultimate public test of their union. But this evening, in the peace of their Vermont sanctuary, tomorrow seemed infinitely promising. The Harrison mansion on Fifth Avenue shone with 1,000 lights that evening, transformed into a palace of light for the annual Family Foundation Gala. Limousines paraded in front of the entrance, pouring out a continuous flow of haute couture dresses and impeccable tuxedos. Emily, seated in the car next to James, felt her heart accelerate as they approached. Her dress, an emerald silk creation by a young Boston designer whom she had discovered and supported through Future Seeds, fell in fluid folds around her. "Nervous?" James asked, gently squeezing her gloved hand. "A little," Emily admitted with a smile. "But not like last time. Today I know who I am." Emily's transformation over these 12 months was remarkable. The shy, desperate young woman who had entered James's penthouse on a cold January night had given way to a confident and accomplished woman, running her own social enterprise and building her life on her own terms. When they entered the grand hall of the mansion, a momentary silence settled, followed by a wave of murmurs. All eyes turned toward them, the couple whose controversial relationship had been the talk of New York high society. Elizabeth Harrison, majestic in a midnight blue gown, stood at the foot of the grand staircase. In accordance with their tacit agreement, she advanced toward them, exchanging traditional kisses with her son, then, to everyone's surprise, with Emily as well. "You look radiant, my dear," she said loud enough to be heard by the closest guests. "This color suits you marvelously." This simple public gesture of acceptance instantly changed the dynamic of the evening. If the Harrison matriarch welcomed Emily, who were the others to reject her? The following hours were a social whirlwind very different from Emily's previous experience. Influential businessmen came to discuss her microcredit fund with her, impressed by the concrete results she could already present. Women who had once disdained her now sought her opinion on philanthropic matters. "Look at how they turn like weather vanes," Isabella murmured to Emily as they refreshed themselves at the buffet. "The hypocrisy of our world truly knows no bounds." Emily smiled, observing the elegant crowd evolving in the sumptuous rooms. "It's human nature, I suppose. We follow social cues for better or worse." "You're surprisingly indulgent," Isabella noted, admiring. "I've learned that grudges are too heavy a burden to carry." And then Emily broke off, seeking James with her gaze. He was engaged in an animated conversation with Robert, his father, in a corner of the salon. Some things are worth forgiving to move forward. In the middle of the evening, Elizabeth gently tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, demanding everyone's attention. Silence immediately fell in the rooms. "Dear friends," she began in her clear, authoritative voice, "as every year we are gathered to celebrate the achievements of the Harrison Foundation and announce our future initiatives." She paused, scanning the room. "This year, however, is special. Not only are we celebrating the Foundation's 50th anniversary, but we are also witnessing a significant renewal within our family itself." Emily felt James stiffen slightly beside her. This development wasn't planned. "My son, James, has chosen a different path than his father and I had imagined for him. Initially, I must admit, this deeply upset me." A murmur ran through the assembly. Elizabeth Harrison never publicly admitted her personal feelings. "But with time I've understood a fundamental truth. A family's true legacy doesn't lie in the blind continuity of traditions, but in each generation's ability to reinvent this legacy while preserving its essential values." She gestured toward James and Emily. "My son and his companion, Emily Walker, have created something remarkable in Vermont. Light Consulting redefines business ethics in a way that, I must admit, perfectly corresponds to my late husband's original vision. And Future Seeds, the microcredit fund founded by Miss Walker, embodies the entrepreneurial spirit and social responsibility we have always sought to promote." Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. This wasn't simply a polite acceptance. It was a public recognition of the value of their work, of their choices. "This is why," Elizabeth continued, "I have the pleasure of announcing that the Harrison Foundation will officially partner with Future Seeds to extend its action throughout America. Not as a majority investor, but as a partner that respects the vision and independence of its founder." Applause erupted in the room. James squeezed Emily's hand, his gaze expressing everything words couldn't say: the pride, the love, the shared victory after so many trials. Later in the evening, as the orchestra played a Viennese waltz, James led Emily onto the dance floor. "My mother never ceases to surprise me," he murmured, as they gracefully twirled among the other couples. "I would never have imagined such an announcement." "She's remarkable," Emily agreed. "I better understand where your determination comes from." James smiled, his eyes never leaving hers as they danced. "Tonight truly marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, doesn't it?" Emily nodded, her heart overflowing with emotion. "A year. It's been almost exactly a year since that night I knocked on your door. The night my life truly began," James whispered, though neither you nor I knew it at that moment. The music softened, and James slowed their steps until they were almost motionless amid the other dancers. "Emily Walker," he said softly, but with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You've taught me what true courage is. You've shown me how to live authentically, how to risk everything for what truly matters." He moved slightly away, slipping his hand into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. "I had planned to do this at the light in our garden, but I realize now that this place is perfect." Emily held her breath upon seeing the small velvet box he now held. "Here, in front of my family, in front of this world that tried to separate us, I want to ask you, He gently opened the box, revealing an antique ring set with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "Will you marry me? Not to become a Harrison, but so we can continue to build our own legacy together?" Time seemed to stop. The music, the conversations, even the curious gazes that had turned toward them, all of it faded away. There remained only James and her at the center of their own universe. "Yes," Emily answered, her voice clear and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." When James slipped the ring onto her finger, a family heirloom, he later explained to her, that had belonged to his paternal grandmother, a woman who had defied the conventions of her time, applause erupted around them. Even Elizabeth, observing the scene from the balcony, allowed herself an authentic smile. Later that night, as they left the gala, James and Emily paused for a moment on the mansion steps. New York stretched before them, a city of lights and promises. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily suddenly asked. "The path you chose, everything you sacrificed?" James took her face in his hands, looking at her with infinite tenderness. "How could I regret anything that led me to you? The old path was traced by others. This one we create together, step by step." Emily smiled, covering his hands with hers. "You know what I realized? That first night, when the envelope fell to the floor of your apartment, when I confessed that I wasn't what you expected. That moment wasn't a failure or a mistake. It was the first authentic act of a story that would transform us both." James nodded, understanding perfectly. Sometimes our lives change not when everything is going well, but precisely when everything seems to be going wrong. It's in moments of vulnerability that we truly discover who we are. He drew her to him, and they remained like that for a moment, embraced under the New York sky. "Let's go home," Emily whispered. "To the light." "To the light," she confirmed, the name of their Vermont home resonating as a symbol of everything they had built together, a sanctuary of truth and love in a world too often governed by appearances and prejudices. As they descended the steps hand in hand toward their car, Emily realized a profound truth. True wealth didn't lie in bank accounts or prestigious names, but in the ability to love authentically and be loved the same way in return. In this economy of the heart, she and James were infinitely rich. And as New York receded behind them, the road north opening like a promise of future, Emily understood that the true lights are not those that shine in the gilded salons of mansions, but those, more subtle and infinitely more precious, that illuminate the soul when it finally finds its way home.